Hello everyone, this is Anirban Datta, and today I'm excited to bring forward the India-Europe strategic dialogue focused on the critical issues around India and Europe relations. We're glad to have Mr. Patryk Kugiel, analyst from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, Mr. Mauro Bonavita, doctoral candidate from the King's College London, and Mr. Prithvi Gupta, junior fellow from the Observers Research Foundation, Mumbai. Welcome everyone on board. As we're aware, the strategic realities between India and Europe are marked with convergence and agreement, as this particular relationship goes back to 1990s when the two sides signed their first strategic agreement in the year 1994. So this particular panel discussion will first start with a question: how exactly we can improve the relationship between India and Europe, and how the contemporary relations between the two sides can move further. So I'll give my floor to Mr. Patryk Kugiel. How do you think that the two sides can move ahead in this particular juncture?
Hello, it's great pleasure of being here. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's a very good moment to discuss Europe or European Union-India relations, because they are at a very critical juncture in the relationship. I think we all agree that the EU-India relationship are the best ever, with a huge potential for further growth in years to come. We just concluded the elections to the European Parliament last weekend, and India has concluded successfully its own parliamentary election a week before. So we have a new old government in Delhi, and we are looking forward to new European Commission and all the European institutions to be in place. And once the EU side, once the European institutions are established, we will observe a fast progress in the relationship. We are looking forward to see the EU-India summit held probably later this year, or more likely next year. And then the leaders from both sides will need to agree on the new multi-annual strategy of cooperation, because the previous one will expire next year. So there is already a lot of discussion and work going on what should be included in the new strategy of cooperation between both partners. And certainly the security and strategic cooperation will be a main focus for cooperation. We used to think about Europe as an economic bloc, as a regional organization, but it has evolved to be much more than this. It is becoming a geopolitical player and strategic player, and also it's becoming more and more active and vibrant in the field of security cooperation with other countries and partners. So I think we are here at the very critical juncture, because we are a new geopolitical moment in Europe caused by the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And because of this, we have observed important changes taking place in Europe. Europe has emerged from this situation as more united than ever, talking about further integration, about taking some decisions in the foreign relations in a way of majority voting, so getting away from this anonymous voting, which form kind of a hindrance and blockade for Europe to speak with one voice and act as a single player at the international stage. So there is a lot of changes going on within the European Union. The recent elections returned to majority in the European Parliament, pro-European and pro-Ukraine majority. So most likely we will see a continuation in major directions and priorities in the European foreign policy. The same like we expect the continuity in the Indian foreign policy after your elections. So the impact of the war in Ukraine is very critical. Yeah? It forced Europe, pushed Europe to become even more security player. It has started delivering, for example, arms, yeah, and military support to Ukraine for the first time in its history. It is talking about development of defense sector. Possibly we will have separate defense commissioner in the new European Commission. There is an understanding that Europe must rearm itself and be more active in the defense sector. That's one. Secondly, Europe has understood that it needs to be a more autonomous and independent actor. May I use the term that is well known in India? Europe wants to have this strategic autonomy, which India value a lot as well. So Europe will be more independent, autonomous player, more focused on security, in both hard security and soft security. This means that Europe will step up its cooperation in countering disinformation, cyber security threats, and maritime security, and counter-terrorism, and many more. So I think Europe will be, as such, as a result of these changes that we are witnessing in Europe, European Union will be even more valuable partner for India. So there is a growing understanding in India that Europe might be a very important player and partner, not only in economic sphere, but also when it comes to security issues. So I think that it will transpire, and we'll observe these changes in the next agenda for cooperation in the upcoming years. And yeah, there are many concrete, detailed issues that needs to be tackled and resolved on the European side. And probably we need to build trust more and confidence between both players. But at a general level, we can say that especially we will see what will happen. But in the case of Donald Trump becoming a US president again, then probably Europe and India will need each other even more as the two pillars of multilateralism and multipolar world order. Europe and India will need to cooperate closely and on number of issues, including this security domain as well. So that's maybe would be enough as an opening statement from my side, and I'm looking forward to more detailed discussion that will follow.
It was a very interesting discussion, Mr. Patryk, especially when you talk about defense relations. You covered strategic studies. You have also covered the importance of elections. So I'll pass the floor to Mr. Prithvi. How exactly do you see the relationship between India and Europe get affected by the elections in both the sides, and how will it affect the strategic realities of the relations that we are currently in?
Hi, thanks, Anirban. I'm Prithvi Gupta. I'm a junior fellow at Observer Research Foundation out of their Mumbai office. Well, Anirban, most of my research focuses on connectivity and supply chains and the geoeconomics and geopolitics surrounding it. But since you have put the question of elections in EU and in India, I feel that even with the coalition government, Mr. Modi will be able to follow through with concrete foreign policy steps and provide continuity that has been built in the past two terms since 2014. In fact, very recently ORF came out with a special report edited by Professor Harsh Pant, titled Modi's 10 years of Modi's foreign policy. And in that also, all the authors collectively argue that when it comes to foreign policy and international trade and economic policy, there are very strong chances that India will be able to follow through and build on the continuity that has been established in the past 10 years. And of course, when it comes to the EU, I feel that the EU and India have very converging they have become very convergent in their policies now when it comes to, let's say, foreign policy or economic policy. There are, of course, a lot of details to be hashed out when it comes to, the ongoing trade agreement, the FTA negotiations. But I feel that there is political will in the highest offices on both sides to find solutions to the recurring problems in the bilateral relations and then build on them to establish more comprehensive and resilient partnerships. And I feel the same case with the UK. Although the elections are right round the corner, but still, even with a Labour government or with the continuation of the Conservative government, I strongly feel that India is positioned in such a way right now that, given China's way of wanting to upend the international order, I feel that India and the EU and even the UK are all placed in such a poignant position that collaboration and hashing out the asymmetries is the only way going forward. So yeah. I feel that's that's enough for me right now. And over to you, Anirban.
Thanks a lot. It was a very interesting the points that I'm gathering from this panelist. One is talking about strategic relations. One is talking about the importance of elections, and the convergence between, especially with the elections coming, especially with the possible elections of Trump, how exactly it can affect the relationship among these three blocks. So, in this sense, I'll come and pass the floor to Mr. Mauro Bonavita. How exactly do you think these especially when we come to ahead with the strategic realities, these elections and the foreign trade can get affected between India and European Union, especially in this regard, when we talk about the strategic realities when we come ahead with elections.
No, thank you very much for the question. Good afternoon from London. Good evening for those of you who are in India. Thank you for hosting me. No, it's a very interesting topic to discuss. Let's put it clearly. 2024 is the year of change. As my colleagues said already, elections in the European Union, in India. We're going to go through a general election here in the UK. And of course, the most important of all is the general election in the United States in November, which will affect all the other way in which we interact among each other. The strategic dimension, which is very important, as Patryk rightly said, the European Union, even though it's an actor that has been around for quite some time, it's in a certain sense a younger actor, because it's emerging right now into a new dimension, which is the security one. And the more the geopolitical competition between the United States and China is driving Washington attention towards the Indo-Pacific and specifically the Pacific, the more the role of Europe needs to step up. In this sense, we can say that both India and the European Union have, to a certain extent, similar views of what it should be done, in the sense that they're both actors that value a plural international order, which is based on certain rules. And this is something that it's important, because in a time when the challenge that communist China poses to the rest of the world, with a vision that is certainly no liberal, no inclusive, it's very hierarchical, and it, to a certain extent, it tends to create a system with Chinese centrality and with little space for other. The fact that two emerging powers, one is a rising power, India, and the other one is becoming more and more relevant, like the European Union, the fact that they share similar values, it's extremely important, because it's already something that, it's on the way. To a certain extent, we can say that India and China, coming to your question, from the strategic vision to the bilateral, they compensate very well each other. The European Union, due to its member state and because of its character, shares an important role in global governance. Some of its member states are present in the United Nations Security Council, and they tend to exercise a certain type of influence over traditional international institutions. Now, the European Union in itself is emerging also in that sense. And India, not just because being a rising power, but also because of two key factors. The one is geographical centrality in the Indo-Pacific, which cannot be forgotten, but also the fact that India tends to operate as a bridge country between the global south and the west. And this is something which is very important. Working together, putting these two elements together is something that can certainly play an important role in terms of global governance. Now, shared challenges, there are shared challenges also which needs to be addressed. A clear one when it comes to trade is the fact of maritime security. Both countries needs and have invested a lot in terms of freedom of navigation and security of sea lines. Both of them, they depend very much on this, and the rising challenges that are affecting both, especially in the Indian Ocean region, but more broadly, are something that they can effectively address together. Other challenges which are collateral to this are, of course, climate change, which is impacting very much smaller and medium powers around the region, and of course, terrorism and other forms of non-traditional maritime security, which is very much there. Now, as you know, discussion, I'm sure we're going to discuss about this later, but just to refer to a point, when it comes to bilateral relations, there's an ongoing discussion between the Union and India on a free trade agreement, but at the same time, there is very much pragmatism on both sides, not to block the relationship just around this. There has been a lot of debates and agreements in terms of sharing technology. The European Union will join the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi as a way to try to bring together the wider Indo-Pacific in terms of sharing best practices and making an added value, which is a very important element. And the sense is that this will continue to be a relevant element. As Prithvi said before, certainly we expect from the Indian side to be a lot of continuity in terms of foreign policy. This is in part because of the way the government coalition agreement in India has played out. We know that the two regional parties which are supporting the BJP are not necessarily that foreign policy oriented. And at the same time, foreign policy has always been a very central element in the way Mr. Modi operates politically. So certainly these are some of the elements. Thank you.
So basically, and thanks for speaking on that, especially when we focus on maritime security, and especially we come ahead with contradictory narratives, and this actually brings us back into the question of geopolitical contentions. So in these questions, Mr. Patryk Kugiel, how do you think that in the context of geopolitical contentions and contradictory narratives, how the India and Europe can collaborate to understand and respond to state-centric disinformation campaigns? Because in the recent period, it has emerged as one of the frontline issues in both the sides. And how exactly do you think that the two sides can counter with the help of collaboration and agreement?
Thank you very much for this question. Interestingly, we have just concluded last year a joint research project with the Observer Research Foundation and my Polish Institute of International Affairs, dealing precisely with a threat of disinformation and foreign policy manipulation. This is certainly an increasing threat especially for democracies, which create a lot of space for freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and etc. With the freedoms that can be exploited by the malign actors with bad intentions. So when I could refer to you the report that is possibly available at the website of RRF. You can read it in detail. We came forward with a set of, 16 or 18 recommendations how Europe and boost the resilience of its societies and its state structures to deal with this emerging threat. So that we propose number of ideas how this can be fostered and developed in the future. But first observation was very important, that was striking to me to some extent, that we haven't found too much examples and experience in cooperation in this field in the past. Basically, this threat of disinformation has been regarded as maybe secondary in importance, or maybe too sensitive issue to be dealt with at an official and also at the expert level. So it shows that we need to strengthen and intensify cooperation and exchange of information about the disinformation. There is no common understanding or one definition that describes how we understand disinformation and who are the actors who disseminate fake news or any other false narratives that can do harm to our societies and our people. We have found also very important differences between how Europe and India approach the problem of disinformation. Whereas Europe, the European Union and member countries focused to a large extent almost exclusively on the Russian disinformation, India has been focusing only on China. As a result, probably, India has developed much bigger understanding of what China is doing in this regard, whereas Europe knows more about Russian techniques and forms of manipulation in information domain. So this lack of cooperation in the past is actually a good potential and launching pad for bigger and stronger cooperation in the future. We can share notes and exchange our knowledge on how for example, Russia and China cooperate in this domain. Because what we have found also in the case of Europe, we've seen that probably China is a newcomer into this field and it's learning fast from Russia. Yeah. So, for example, if India would like to be better prepared for countering disinformation coming from China, it may have a look at what Russia is doing in Europe, because it is very likely that one day China will apply the same tactics and methods of manipulation of information, what we have experienced already in Europe, what Russia is doing here. So this suggests that there is a great deal for mutual learning between Europe and India. And this mutual learning can be done at different levels, starting from experts and academics and journalists from society level. I think there is a need for creating some kind of mechanisms of regular interactions and cooperation between experts dealing with disinformation in India and in Europe. There is a need for greater exchanges of journalists, for example, and media persons to come and to Europe and come to India to learn how the other side is dealing with this threat. So we need to invest more in common understanding of the threat and how the other side is dealing with this threat, in order maybe we can learn from each other to some extent. Then at the official level, we can create a certain mechanisms that can foster cooperation in this regard. In our report, for example, we propose to establish a center of excellence for countering hybrid threats and disinformation in New Delhi, possibly with this financial support from the European Commission, modeled after that kind of mechanism that has been established in Helsinki for the use of European member states and European Union member states and member states of the NATO. So possibly that kind of institutes and other institutions and mechanisms that has been established in Europe already may be a point of reference also for India when India is developing its own structures and mechanisms to improve its resilience towards the foreign information manipulation. And finally, at the very official level, I think to give higher importance to this issue, that could be included into discussions at the forthcoming EU-India summit, for example. Or maybe we need to make it more a regular interaction by including this into the workings of the Trade and Technology Council. There are certain working groups already under the TTC, and possibly a working group or on hybrid threats and disinformation would give this topic a certain value and importance within the structures of the administration in Europe and in India to cooperate on this on a regular basis. Because by the end of the day, what we need to achieve and attain through these interactions is to create more mutual understanding and trust. Disinformation is also a very contentious issue and sensitive. And also there is discussion in India ongoing, I understand, about disinformation coming from Western media and Western countries. So I think only more discussions, more exchanges, and open mind discussions can create a space for better mutual understanding and for trust building. Because without trust, we can't really go too far. It will hamper our cooperation between intelligence services, and it will hamper cooperation at the political level. So I think we need, Europe and India need to include hybrid threats and disinformation as a high priority in the forthcoming agenda for cooperation after 2025, and give it certain political significance to upgrade it in the mechanism of discussion. And then we can also think and talk about more specific tools and mechanisms that we can develop jointly in order to deal and counter disinformation coming from abroad.
That was a very interesting inputs, Mr. Kugiel, when we usually talk about geopolitical contentions, contradictory narratives, and this also fits into the broader theory of geopolitics as well. In that sense, we also see the importance of naval strategies between the two blocs emerging with the ever-changing geopolitical landscape, and with the advent of great powers and the growth of regional powers, especially in this part of the world. So my question is now directed to Mr. Mauro Bonavita. How do you think that India and Europe can rewrite their naval strategies, especially when it comes to the changing geopolitical landscape in this part of the world?
No, thank you for this. So in order to think about how they can rewrite it, or at least cooperate more together to address the challenges, we first need to address very shortly what is the big situation that's going on here, right? Because yes, there is geopolitical competition, but the truth that we see in the Indo-Pacific is that there's an increasing attempt to diverge the hard security aspect of it, which is taken up by the United States with its stance in supporting Taiwan and other allies, and the actions of powers like the European Union or India who try to operate on the sideline into more non-traditional maritime security to foster capabilities of different powers around, including each other's, in order to try to support the rule-based order, which is under threat in the region. Now, the truth is that the more we advance into this great power competition between Communist China and the US, the more we understand that hard security cannot be completely taken out of the picture. Because most of the time when we think about non-traditional security issues, which goes on in the Indian Ocean region, in South China Sea and in East Asia, we certainly see that most of the actors involved are directly linked to this geopolitical competition. It is not a case that when we think about, for example, connectivity or trying to address climate change or illegal fishing situation in these different areas, we often see that behind initiatives and attempts to work out, often China tries to bring in its own interest and its operation. So the first of all is, I would say, to understand and accept that hard security cannot be completely left over. Now, both India and the European Union have a very clear path in their current strategy, which is to work more with those regional powers which are more active, and they can really be a bridge between them and smaller to medium powers. I'm referring obviously to Japan, which is very much active, especially in the Bay of Bengal, with several connectivity initiatives, and it is a traditional cooperative partner for Southeast Asia. The way Japanese diplomacy has been able to navigate the contradictions of ASEAN and remaining a relevant power there, it's something which can be certainly an added value. And of course, Australia, which is a very much important rising power. Now, if we think about the two players that we have here, the European Union and India, we see that certainly more than rewriting the strategies, there are two urgencies that the two actors need to address in this sense. From the European side, there is the need to come to terms with the differences that member states have in the vision that they have in terms of addressing the security aspect of the Indo-Pacific. This is something which is dramatically divergent when we think actors like France, which is a regional resident power and therefore has certain immediate security needs, and other major powers which tends to put an emphasis more on terms of technology, and trade technology and traditional trades rather than in the security one. This is a debate that we need to have in the European Union, because the European strategy for the Indo-Pacific cannot just be a multiplier of the capabilities of each individual member state, but we are reaching a time when the European Union as a player in itself can really make a difference across the region, going beyond sometimes each member state. And this is something which needs to be taken into account. When it comes to India, certainly India has become a very important maritime player, especially in South Asia and in the Indian Ocean region. And everyone recognizes this. This is something that it's very much evaluated by the West. However, we see that due to some structural issues which are going on, there is still very slow, how should I say, change of mind in terms of addressing the maritime aspect of Indian security. Of course, India has always had security priorities when it comes to South Asia. We know very well that the way in which Communist China for the last 3-4 decades has fostered Pakistan in an anti-Indian sense, and this is something which is certainly going on, and the dramatic situation of the Himalaya, where I'm going to say something which is not very diplomatic because the Indian government doesn't call it like that, but it's certainly a low-intensity conflict, something which is going on at the border in the Himalaya. Even if we do not recognize it, it's quite clear what China is doing there. However, there is an importance that the strategic discussion needs to shift more towards the sea, which with certain implications. The first one is to have a proper debate about how to enlarge the Navy and what type of Navy you want in order to address real challenges. Status is important, and certainly the ongoing discussion about the role of aircraft carrier is, we understand where it comes from. India was the first Asian power to have an aircraft carrier in the 1950s, and this is something which certainly plays a role in the way in which the rising power sees itself. However, priorities certainly should dictate for a wider discussion. And the second element is for politics to understand the need to support the Navy in its role as a supporter for those powers and those partners of India, which can really make the difference in terms of guaranteeing an Indian Ocean region which is less, with a less presence of the Communist China. A clear example for this is Vietnam. Vietnam is a key partner for India, not just because similar challenges in terms of rule-based order, but certainly because it brings competition with Communist China in a different dimension. And it moves from a reactionary situation into one where you start really to contest more. This is something that so far the strategy which focuses on the core of the South Asian maritime, again, with excellent reasons, of course, but it's something which could be contributes very much. And then finally, there needs to be more emphasis, this is already happening, in terms of sharing practices and supporting smaller to medium powers in terms of contesting Chinese influence, especially island nations, which are very important in terms of security and safety of sea trade line, but also because this will support the idea of a more structure in the Pacific where actors can really come together and try to make a difference. This can happen through something similar to what Patryk said, centers of excellences in maritime sense, which are very, very much important, or further supporting the initiatives which are already there in the Pacific Ocean initiatives and IORA and Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, all of which try to address from different point of views similar elements. It is not an easy element, so there's nothing magic that you can put in your strategy that immediately makes things work, but working, let's put it this way, on our side of the spectrum of this competition, it's much more difficult because we want to support a plural order which brings everyone together. But at the same time, it's a way to create really a system which in the medium to long term can really support our stability and our prosperity, which at the end of the day is our goal. Thank you.
So the entire discussion is bringing us back to the maritime security and how exactly it is the geopolitical contentions is determined by it. Especially when we talk about the rules-based international order and the open, free in the Pacific in that regard, free lines of communications, it brings back to the critical maritime choke points and everything. So this particular question, and especially this is my insight as well. I'm asking a question out of it. This particular question is directed to Mr. Prithvi Gupta. How exactly do you think that the strategic partnership between India and Europe can shape the regional stability around critical maritime choke points, especially that lies in the Pacific region?
Well, thank you, Anirban. In fact, some of my research has also focused on how critical maritime choke points have emerged as, geo-economic weapons for state as well as non-state actors to pressurize developed and developing economies on either side of the conflict, as has been visible in the Red Sea crisis when undersea cables were cut by either the Houthi rebels who claim that they did not cut it, or by or they have been cut by the sinking of the UK ship which was carrying fertilizers. But even besides that, I feel that critical maritime choke points like the bubble, the Red Sea, the the Strait of Hormuz, the Panama Canal, as well as the Malacca Strait, they have emerged as critical maritime choke points, which also have a lot of geopolitical tension surrounding them. I feel that in this regard, the EU and India have, well, separately, they have always taken steps to ensure diversification of supply chains, or diversification of trade routes, but collectively it has only been in the G7 meeting, New Delhi declaration, after that they signed the IMEC corridor agreement. I feel that the IMEC corridor agreement is one of one of the many critical steps on which the EU India partnership should build to further diversify and, well, diversify their trade routes as well as diversify their supply chains. More initiatives like the IMEC corridor, or operationalizing the INSTC corridor, these are initiatives which will further diversify India's trade routes to the west. In fact, the Middle East also plays a very critical part in connecting India to the EU. So connectivity through the Middle East to India and the to EU is another initiative within the IMEC. So I feel that building on this IMEC partnership and building on the INSTC are two critical sectors in which India and EU can participate and further diminish the role of these maritime choke points, not in the short term, obviously, but in the longer term, definitely. Yeah.
The particular discussions that we have talked about actually brings much more the discussion towards the non-state actors and how exactly we can tackle them, especially not only in the Pacific region, but also in the European region as well. With the growth in the terrorist activities, especially we see the information war is also playing out, especially when we talk about the intermingling of maritime security with the non-state actors and the threats posed by them. So this particular question and is directed to Mr. Patryk. How exactly do you think, from the prism of cooperation in the counterterrorism domain, can the two sides can take interest in tackling terrorist activities? Because there has been a hesitancy in the recent period regarding information sharing as well as the intelligence sharing as well. And what exactly do you think that the two sides can collaborate to make sure that the implementations of the existing declarations which can provide benefits to both?
Cooperation in countering terrorist activities or piracy is not easy task for the European Union. Cooperation with India, because the European Union has a limited right and capacity to do this. Yeah, the terrorism cooperation in counter-terrorism is in the domain of national governments of the member states of the European Commission. So I think to a large extent, EU member states will remain the major interlocutors and partners for India to cooperate in the domain of countering terrorism and piracy. But having said this, we can obviously make a step forward and improve our cooperation at the EU level, cooperation with India. And possibly we have already good examples of joint military exercises in the Indian Ocean between the Operation Atalanta, EU-led maritime operation, military operation in the Strait of Hormuz and Indian Ocean, and Indian Navy. We had recently joint patrols and interactions between Indian Navy and European Union or European navies under the EU flag in countering piracy or attacks coming from Houthis and other pirates in the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. So probably continuation of this kind of joint military exercises in the maritime domain must be upheld and strengthened in the years to come. We need to invest more in exchanges and contacts between military personnel from India and EU military structures in Europe. That it is already ongoing, but probably we need to intensify this cooperation and exchanges. As I said already before, the major problem is a lack of trust. So only through intensified dialogue and exchanges and meetings, this trust deficit can be breached. So there are already discussions also about more regular cooperation between the Europol, the EU main police force or institution, and Indian Central Bureau of Investigation, I guess. So this kind of cooperation at different levels of military and security personnel between Europe and India can certainly help to build a confidence and trust to allow for more intelligence sharing, etc. So more joint institutions, joint exercises, joint meetings can be helpful, but we need to be realistic at the same time. Yeah? European Union has its own army, its own police, and in this area, it will be a secondary partner for India after the EU member states, but can create still, European Union can create a good atmosphere and kind of umbrella for cooperation between EU member states and India in terms of countering terrorism and other non-state actors, threats coming from these actors. I would like to add also on what have been said by my colleagues previously on the differences between the EU member states when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. Mauro said that there are huge divergences between EU member states when it comes to Europe's position on Indo-Pacific, and this is true. And this stems out of the different capacities of the European member states, different presence in the Indo-Pacific, and most importantly, different approach and position towards China. Different EU member states have different interests, different stake in relationship with China. So therefore, we have very different approaches, more hawkish and more mild and cooperative approaches towards China. But nevertheless, Europe has very unified and speaks with one voice when it comes to strategy on the Indo-Pacific. Yeah? And I think we also share a lot with India in this regard. Europe wants and thus invest already in stability and cooperative regional order in the Indo-Pacific. Europe is providing capacity building initiatives for countries in the Indo-Pacific, is investing into these initiatives like ESIWA, so European Union Security Cooperation with and in Asia, or Project Crimario, which is focused on the maritime cooperation. So probably next year we'll see renewal of operation or project initiative Crimario for a third term. So this is an example how Europe has already been investing in stability and security in the Indo-Pacific. And we share with India this attachment to the international rules-based order and open and free sea lines of communication. And I think from our point of view, the rules-based international order is indivisible. So it applies the same way in the Indo-Pacific like it applies to Europe. So in this sense, if any country would like to violate international laws or international borders, internationally recognized, I'm sure that Europe would step in, at least to openly condemn that kind of aggression and offer all possible support to the country that has been attacked. And I think also this is what one can expect from India to behave in the same way when it comes to the rules-based order and international integrity and sovereignty of countries in Europe, because rules-based international order is in our common interest, yeah? And we need to apply the same standards and rules to both regions and to all regions around the world. And one short comment on IMEC. I agree with Prithvi that IMEC has a great potential to bring closer India and Europe and invest together in the connectivity projects linking Europe and India. And it shows that we have shared interest in stability in the Middle East, and we need to find out more alternative routes in order to keep the trade and other flows of goods going on. And in this regard, I think also Central European countries can play a role. We can also connect with the IMEC, yeah, and provide a connection from Greece up to the north to Nordic states. So we will have a new alternative route, connectivity, transport corridor linking Europe with India. I'm not that much sure about the future of INSTC,
Yeah.
because of the current situation in Europe. INSTC leads to Russia, and for now I don't know where the goods brought to Russia can go. Maybe it would need to go back to China. So probably it makes no much sense at the moment when the relations between Europe and Russia are in very serious crisis, probably there will be no takers for any kind of support to this India north-south transport corridor.
So this was a very interesting discussions, especially when we talk about the importance of counterterrorism, the importance of collaboration in that regard. But the importance of state power still remains a very important and a critical point in this current domain. Exactly when we relate the rules-based international order, maritime security. Apart from the activity of the non-state actors as well, we can see the importance of states as well, mainly the importance of the European Union and importance of Europe becomes very important in this regard when we talk about strengthening maritime capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region, because traditionally the powers based in Europe had certain degree of regional autonomy and a certain degree of power demonstration, especially in the Pacific region. So this particular question is directed to Mr. Mauro Bonavita with regard to the latest invent of latest maritime strategies. How exactly do you think the European Union's and Europe's maritime strategy differs from those of the regional powers in the region? Because there are various actors, especially when we when we delve into the concept of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region.
No, of course. Thank you very much for this. Well, it's an interesting question in the sense that before we try to differentiate between European and regional actors, we have to differentiate among European actors what they intend in terms of maritime security. The first distinction is between, as we said before, resident powers and powers which are extra-regional completely. So when it comes to maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, we see that very few countries in the European Union have a proper strategy about it. The most structured one are, of course, those of France and Germany. The Netherlands have one. There's a document which is a contribution to the European Union strategy, which has been published by the Italian government. And then there are similar initiatives about others. But the countries which have the real capabilities to be present in a substantive way are certainly the majors one, which have a higher influence in the way they supported the development of the European Union strategy. Now, there are countries which have structural reasons to be present and concerned about the Indo-Pacific in terms of maritime security. Again, France being a resident power. In the case of Italy, it's interesting because Italy sees its maritime security going beyond the Mediterranean with the concept of the large Mediterranean, which includes the Gulf of Aden and has a point of view in the Western Indian Ocean, where Italy has been present in maritime terms under the flag of the European Union or NATO in different capabilities, both in the Gulf, Persian Gulf and in the Gulf of Aden. Then there are countries which certainly are putting themselves the question about what to do with increasing instability and insecurity in the Indo-Pacific in terms of their own prosperity. And the case of Germany is very much present in that sense. So most of these maritime security strategies for the Indo-Pacific, they certainly include and mention the question about traditional security, mixing it with the other elements. So there's not an exclusionary, certainly, approach to this sense. However, the emphasis that we put on this is very much different. So the difference between them and resident powers is probably the fact that resident power have to take into account the balance of powers in the region in a very different way. In the sense that when we think specifically about countries like India, the dynamics which are playing in terms of approaching smaller countries in the Indian Ocean region or South Asia is certainly very much different from the way the European Union see its contribution or its role within the region. Another element is very much the emphasis which is put in terms of cooperation, certain type of entry points that the European Union member states have within the region through traditionally established realities, which are a heritage of the Cold War, but are already starting to transition into a new situation. If we think about the centrality of the role of Japan, certainly Japan has always been linked to the United States and a certain type of security framework, but its role now it's going very much beyond this. And therefore, this opens the way to a certain type of cooperation which goes beyond. But an element which brings together the European Union member states' maritime strategies and the strategy of the EU in itself is very much at the core of it the aspiration for a role of autonomy, which is not independence within the Western bloc, but is certainly the aspiration to play a role of autonomy in addressing different maritime security aspects, both traditional and non-traditional, in the different ways of which member states wants to address them. Now, autonomy is not independence in the sense that there is a clear understanding with supporting the rule-based order, which is enshrined in the international current institution. It's something which links very much Europe to India, to the United States, and to other countries. However, at the same time, the idea of autonomy is the aspiration for the European Union to emerge as an actor which is distinct from the United States, and this plays into very much its aspiration for a certain type of status, which we see these strategies try to address in the region, but it's also a way to try to assert its own interest. Let's not forget that contesting Chinese influence can be easier if you present yourself as something autonomous from the United States, because obviously it opens more doors, but at the same time, it's also a way to make business and to support your own presence there. You need to have partners and a way to present yourself as a partner to certain powers which are somewhere in between, so they might appreciate differences in terms of maritime security vision, is something which can help you to anchor yourself very much into the region.
This is a very interesting discussion when we talk about the importance of European maritime security strategies and the importance of regional powers as well. So in that regard, this question is directed to Mr. Prithvi Gupta. How do you think that the importance with the evolving connectivity and with the emergence of climate change and security threats and pandemic response, how the two sides can collaborate with one another, especially with addressing the global challenges in the current period?
Well, thank you for your question, Anirban. I think that when it comes to climate change and managing pandemic or health crisis responses, there's a lot of scope of collaboration between India and the EU. In fact, I feel that India has a lot to learn from EU when it comes to public healthcare infrastructure, adopting best practices from the European Union as a whole, and in turn, I feel that India is a very big market for EU when it comes to green energy and green energy investments. In fact, in fact, the IMEC corridor itself features, because again, I'm a connectivity and supply chains expert primarily. The IMEC corridor itself features a lot of green hydrogen pipelines, which are being built by a consortium of Indian, Arab, and Western companies. There are a host of undersea cables which are being manufactured well in an eco-friendly manner. And even besides that, there's an idea of renewable energy grids, interconnected renewable energy grids, which will go all the way from Europe to India, and everything, and will cover everything in between. So I feel there's a lot of investment opportunities for the EU and for the Middle East in India when it comes to renewable energy generation. And for India also, I feel that it's when it comes to climate mitigating climate change with like-minded partners like the EU, I feel that India will also benefit hugely from green energy development and green energy investments directed by the West into India, because right now 80% of our energy supply is imported, be it coal, be it oil, or be it gas. So going green is not just an economic or a climate imperative for India, but also in this increasingly geoeconomic contestation with China and with other adversaries. I feel that it is also a matter of national security, which I feel that green energy can somewhat help somewhat mitigate. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so especially when we were talking, especially Prithvi, when we were talking about counterterrorism, maritime security, and since you were a supply chains expert, we were basically focusing this from the prism of climate change and other non-traditional
Right.
security threats as well.
Right.
And
Right.
there are very other broad-ranging ranging themes that have emerged out of this particular panel discussion. We're
Yeah.
focusing on rules-based international order. We are focusing
Yeah.
on emerging existing declarations,
Correct.
especially with regard to counterterrorism domain. So we are right now we will be moving out towards a discussion session, a short discussion session. How does everyone in this panel feel about the existing maritime security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region, especially from the prism of non-traditional security threats, like from the prism of supply, from the prism of the great power politics, from the prism of global value chains, and especially from the prism of disinformation campaigns as well, and how exactly the European Union and the India can play a role into it. Mr. Patryk, you can take up the discussion.
Well, a lot has been said already. I don't know what can be added to this. Yep, certainly Europe and India can do together to assist smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific. Talking like Maldives or Sri Lanka, only Maldives, for example. Let's take this example. India has currently rather difficult relationship with new government, new president of Maldives. So probably India will find more difficult to influence somehow the situation in Maldives, yeah, even though it can offer its assistance in number of accounts. But this is for me like an example where India and Europe can be complementary. Whereas India has like more hands tied at the moment when it comes to Maldives. This can be a moment for European Union to step in and offer its assistance in capacity building of the maritime, of Navy in the Maldives, of the border guards in the Maldives, to assist such a small country like Maldives to develop its own capabilities to defend and monitor its own exclusive economic zone and its borders. Yeah, it has a huge importance to both India and Europe to keep countries like Maldives independent and capable of securing itself and monitoring the situation around it, yeah? To invest in the maritime domain awareness in a country like Maldives. Because it's important for the flow of goods, for maritime routes, but also in terms of piracy or human trafficking, drugs trafficking, piracy, terrorism threats, etc. Yeah, so European Union can probably play a larger role in supporting countries like Maldives and Seychelles or any other in the region to boost its resilience towards any non-traditional or traditional security threats. That would be also important for anyone who looks at the Indo-Pacific as a platform for rivalry between China and India, or China and the US, or any other kind of rivalry. If countries like Maldives are left without a stronger support from European Union, like or US or any other countries, then it will become only more and more dependent on China. So we share this interest on many levels, yeah, to cooperate and support other countries in the Indo-Pacific region to help them be more resilient and independent in the foreign policy, because we share both geopolitical and economic interests in stability and openness of the Indo-Pacific. So I will probably leave it here.
Mr. Mauro, how do you think that the taking the points that Mr. Patryk told about, especially with regard to India's relationship vis-a-vis its neighbors, especially the neighbors that has been located in the Indian Ocean region. How exactly do you think that the European Union and the other powers can play a role into it, given the current advent of China and the presence of other geopolitical actors in this specific region?
No, thank you for this, and I totally agree with what Patryk said. Let me just make a step forward and go a little bit beyond the strict maritime security issue, look at the wider picture. It's a very difficult topic, let's put it this way, because even though we both share certain ideas of how the international system should work, and we all understand that there's an actor which is challenging that, then there are a lot of other issues which plays into this. India as a rising power has the right to aspire to exercise a certain role within its own region. And traditionally, India has exercised a certain type of role within South Asia, including the Indian Ocean region. Now, this has changed. There's a growing literature about why South Asia is moving a little bit beyond the traditional vision of positive vision that has always been of India. This is in part because of communist China's influence, but there are other aspects which more domestic related, which are there. So the European Union and India's partnership in addressing these issues can be potentially a very, very positive one, because both of them can overcome two major problematic aspects. One is being the bigger brother, let's put it this way, in the neighborhood, which is not necessarily makes things easier. And the other one is, of course, colonial heritage. So the idea that countries' aspiration that regional countries have to being perceived as having a certain type of agency and reaching the point where they can operate in the international system with their own ideas and vision. If India and the European Union, and this I go back to something that was said before by my two colleagues on the panel about building trust, if India and the European Union can get to a point where there is enough trust between them, where it becomes easier to operate within a shared framework of value and issues towards these smaller countries, where one compensates the other, and when there is a problem, we know who's taking over, not necessarily always openly together, let's put it this way, I think this could be a very positive and potential element. And now, this is not easy, but an indication that we have within the Indo-Pacific is that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we had a lot of unilateral initiatives. There was a moment when unilaterals boomed. It seems that this was every other month you had some sort of agreement, and it seems that this was the future of it. Now, the more time passes, the more there is a clear distinction between those multilaterals which operate and are effective and those which are just beautiful announcements. So we are going towards probably a situation where certain type of multilaterals with certain type of actors which have capabilities will be the one which will structure a new order around the Indo-Pacific. And India and the European Union, for different reasons we have mentioned before, are probably the main drivers of this type of initiatives in the Indian Ocean region, along, of course, with Japan. And I'm not considering the US and China because they play in a different category. So building trust, trying to structure around these initiatives certain type of ideas, and most importantly, have an inclusive vision of it, which is the most difficult one. As Patryk mentioned, there are political differences. We know very well that so far there are countries like Nepal and Bangladesh which have certain type of governments which might change. So how do we address in the long term this type of issues? I think these are some of the issues that we have to start. But before building trust among us is something which is not necessarily that easy. The more the relationship intensifies between the European Union and India, the more we see that we need, to a certain extent, to accept the fact that we talk about each other in certain ways, and to understand where there is political debate and where there is real cooperation, which is important. Let's put it this way. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Prithvi, any of your closing thoughts regarding how exactly the India and Europe can manage a response, especially in the event of a crisis in the region? Because as per the discussion that we that summed up, that this region is driven by maritime security challenges, especially that can affect, has a possibility can affect supply chain mechanisms as well. So how exactly do you think that the cooperation in this regard can be bolstered by both the European Union and both Europe and India? And how exactly, what are your closing thoughts on this?
I feel that India and Europe have already been collaborating when it comes to building infrastructure in South Asia, because while South Asia has had a very interesting development trajectory. Its development, because of the regional instability in the region, which has plagued the region for quite some while. The development trajectory of the region has also been, well, somewhat lopsided. And because of that, right now, although India is spending massively on infrastructure development, but its neighboring countries do not have the capacity per se to do that kind of infrastructure development. And for that, I think the EU and the US have particularly, and in fact, even the UK have particularly stepped up. Very recently, I was reading that the European Union's Global Gateway project built a solar power plant in Nepal in collaboration with the Indian government, and because India already has electrical transmission lines, so I guess close to 50% capacity of that project will be exported to India, and the trade is being done in Indian rupees. So it's a win all around. It's a win for Europe, it's a win for Nepal, and it's a win for India. So I feel that these are the small collaborations with which India and EU can start building infrastructure and connectivity in South Asia. And then moving forward, they can partner in, bigger projects like laying undersea cables in the Indian Ocean region, building port infrastructure, which is very much required. And one of the major things that India and EU need to come together is countering Chinese loans, investments, and contracts in the Indian Ocean region. Today, close to 18 ports in the Indian Ocean region are managed by Chinese state companies. And these state companies usually have a government agenda. There's nothing hidden in that. So that is something which India and the EU need to come together and, figure something out about that. The Chabahar port deal it was one step in countering China in the Indian Ocean region and diversifying supply chains. But that's a very small step in a broader game which is going on in terms of bolstering and diversifying connectivity and supply chains. So I feel these are the few things that India, you should do and should continue to do. And yeah, I think that's it for me, Anirban. Thank you.
If I may just echo what Prithvi said.
So please go ahead.
That I agree totally that probably the Global Gateway, the EU initiative to mobilize 300 billion US dollars in coming years, offers a huge opportunity for cooperation and for investments in the Indo-Pacific and Indian Ocean especially. And this would be a good avenue to advance cooperation, not only in this military security dimension, but also in the connectivity, climate change, and everything, infrastructure development, everything you said. That Global Gateway can be a game changer in coming years, and EU and India could cooperate more closely on joint projects in the region. And last statement is that Europe needs to prioritize Indian Ocean as a region to cooperate with India, because Europe wants to be present everywhere and do everything, but we need to set the priorities more precisely, I guess. And when it comes to cooperation with India, we need to focus more on European side, on the Indian Ocean. This is the area where our interests converge and overlap very often. So we don't need to think too much about Pacific Islands or whatever, yeah. But we need to mobilize and focus our limited resources still in doing tangible projects in the Indian Ocean, yeah, investing in ports, in connectivity, in cables, undersea cables, and etc. Yeah, and investing more in capacity building, using Indian expertise and lower cost of jobs and investments to match it with European capital and technologies, and we would be a perfect match to do more good in the Indian Ocean region.
This was a very interesting points that all the panelists have made. We have actually come to the close of our discussion, where we have discussed about shared priorities and how exactly we can bridge with regard to regional stability in the Pacific region, especially when we come ahead with the challenges like maritime security, from climate change to counter-terrorism, and also we have also discussed a lot about misinformation campaigns and disinformation campaigns in this particular region, and how the India and European Union as well as Europe can counter this specific issue. So in this sense, we have almost come to the end of the discussion, and we thank every one of you and those of you who will be watching this discussion and those who are watching this discussion right now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.